Bouncers of Reddit, have you ever crossed paths with someone you've had to throw out of a club or bar? How was the experience? I was a bouncer years and years ago. I had to throw out a friend of mine. He didn't pick fights or anything, but was becoming abusive to the staff. When he sobered up he felt really bad about it and came back to apologize. I did some work bouncing in the early 90s and had to throw a couple of guys out for getting hammered and harassing the bar girls. Well, after work I was walking to my car and heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and it was those two guys from earlier. I figured it was going to be a fight but they wanted to thank me. Turns out one of them had a sister who had been assaulted some years before. They said once they sobered up and realized they were acting inappropriately with the girls on staff they felt bad. Good guy for acknowledging his mistake. I was interviewed by a guy we had tossed out. I still remember his name because he was such a douchebag that we banned him after this interaction and we all kind of laughed at his name because it fit his behavior so well. Think Kyle Blake, not his real name, but he has two kind of bro names as first and last. Anyway, fast forward about a year, having finished school, and I met a staffing agency to interview for some crappy job. In walks Mr. Blake. Unfortunately, nothing super interesting happened, but throughout the interview he acted a little strange. I never found out if he recognized me, but I was not offered the job. So you threw out Jake Paul? What do I like to do in my free time? I usually spend it down at the bar throwing douche bros out on their face. I remember that interview. Thanks for not mentioning my real name. Chuck Todd seems to be doing well these days, so maybe your intervention helped. It was Chad Chadinson, wasn't it? Never trust a man with two first names. Many years ago one of my relatives got traumatized in college by a horrific incident involving a bouncer and a patron. She was on a first date at a local sports bar and an off-duty bouncer from a different bar or club that knew her date happened to walk in. He came over and said hi and joined them at the table. A bit later a guy the bouncer had ejected before walked up and shot him in the back of the head. My relative said it was an out-of-nowhere deafening boom and randomly the bouncer's head going flying forward to the table. A few seconds of shock and then people screaming and some running as it sets in. She was in nursing school at the time and mustered what little sense she could and yelled for someone to give her a shirt so she could put it on the back of his head while someone called 911. She told me he lived. Disabled for life but lived. She never went on a date with that first guy again. She knows it wasn't his fault, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Edit. Thank you for the awards. It has been long enough that she seems to move as on much as she can. I just can't fathom the logic, even drunk bro logic, of killing someone over being kicked out of a bar. That's so horrible. I'm glad he survived, at least somewhat. Yet I wouldn't go back for a second date either. Their face would remind me of that event every time. Sweet Jesus. That sounds absolutely horrifying. Your relative probably saved his life. I've bounced off and on for about 15 years in the same mid-sized city, about 150k people. One night as people were leaving, this guy sucker punched another patron right inside the door. Several other people quickly got involved. I grabbed Mr. Sucker Punch and he spins around and squares up with me. I guess because I'm tall 6'6", people always seem to try and rush me and wrestle me by the waist. Mr. SP was no different. We end up wrestling for a second before I finally get a solid grip on him. He is still trying to fight at this point. I ended up picking him up and throwing him through the exit doors, breaking one of them off the hinges. About a week later I'm out to eat with my mom of all people, and in walks Mr. Sucker Punch and sits down 2 tables over. I wasn't particularly worried about it, but I really didn't want to have to beat someone up in front of my mom. About 5 minutes later I see him talking to the waitress and she makes her way over to our table. That guy over there said you threw him through a door the other night at the bar. He wanted me to tell you he is sorry for being a dumb drunk. Well, at least he wasn't too salty about it. It is often the hardest thing to accept that you were wrong. Wow. That's heartwarming. My dad is also 6 feet 6 inches and was a bouncer in college. He was also a defensive tackle in the NFL and is * not small. * He talks about how drunks always seem to get it in their head that they want to fight him just because he is tall. He has never started a fight in his life, but boy did he have to toss people out for trying to deck him. I apologize all the time at every opportunity at home to my kids and wife and whatever. It's like a muscle you need to keep flexing. Hopefully I raise kids who do the same. A lot of people think they're above apologizing. How did your mom react? Ex-chicken shop worker here, what's that you say? Chicken shop worker? We asked for bouncers. Well, working in a chicken shop in a shitty neighborhood full of lads and iced out bogans means I practically was a bouncer. One night 2 dudes come in clearly drunk or drugged out. They start discussing what they want. Eventually their conversation grows wild with energy and pure hatred as man number 1 argues with man number 2 over whether they should get a bunch of chicken nuggets or 2 whole chickens off the rack. This argument turns into a full-on brawl as man number 2 presses man number 1's face against the Bain Marie, knocking our dear friend Henry the Rooster, a little statue we kept on top of the Bain Marie, onto the floor where he shattered into pieces before my very eyes. Fearing for my co-worker's safety, I grab man number 2 and shove him outside, where man number 1 eagerly follows, pouncing on his friend, taking the opportunity he apparently thinks I've opened for him. Locked the store doors, called the police, and watched as man number 2 yet again gets the upper hand on man number 1 and begins kicking the shit out of him. Funnily enough, 2 weeks later I come across man number 1 and man number 2 in the line at McDonald's. I didn't think they recognized me until I sat down to eat my food and overheard one of them say, "Yo, isn't that the chicken cunt?" After hearing that, I promptly left with both direction and magnitude. R.I.P. Henry, you will be missed. This is the most Australian fast food story I think I've ever read. Yo, isn't you the cock smashers? I kept trying to figure out WTF chicken shop was a euphemism for, until I finally realized you meant literally. Holy shit, the chicken cunt, has me cracking up. Rip Henry. What is a bain-marie? I googled it and all I came up with were double boiler looking pots. No, but it was specifically not interacting with the person that makes all the difference in my story. Also, important to note that I am not a professional bouncer. This was my first time bouncing and only did it because I was dead broke. I worked some random dive bar and everything was fine going into the night, mostly regulars and a couple randos just having a good time. This table of about 6 people were getting a little loud and taking shot after shot. I kept my eye on them, but they didn't do anything to warrant an intervention. An hour before close, as the group goes up to the bar to close their tabs, a guy and a girl in the group started arguing and the guy pours his Corona all over the girl. As I walk up to eject them, the guy turns his beer bottle around and holds it like a weapon and taunts me to come at him. My inexperience as a bouncer probably plays a hand in this next decision, because I still wonder what the right move as a bouncer would have been. I rush him and overpower him and hold him down until he's calm. I escort him out and talk to him outside. He tries to walk back in after I tell him to have a good night. He starts getting physical again, but this time he knocks me onto my back and gets on top of me. I have no idea why he didn't ground and pound me right there. We tussle for a bit. At this point I've pulled his braids. We've both choked each other and we're both scraped up and bleeding. His group eventually comes out and pulls him away and they all leave. I go back in and make sure all the patrons left and pick up the chairs and tables we've knocked over. We also broke the bar's front door in the scuffle. I go home and clean up, wake up with bumps and bruises and work the door again the next day. The same group comes in but without the guy. They end up talking to me. The girl thanks me, I don't know why, and the other guys tell me how lucky I am because that was the day he left his house without his gun. Apparently they all met up at one of their friends' house before going out and the guy mentioned how pissed he was that he left it at home. I quit that night and never bounced again. $60 and some chicken wings a night is not worth losing my life over. Holy shit, I'm glad you're okay. You shoulda called the cops the moment he brandished the bottle. Assuming you have decent camera footage, that would have been enough to pin him. Only if he actually went for you should you have gotten physical. Other than that, rushing him is still better than getting blindsided. It happened fairly frequently with the regulars. As long as they weren't fighting, they'd be allowed back in the next night. Usually they were pretty embarrassed, and apologized for being a drunken jackass. One time I did have to kick out a good friend because he got in a fight. He was in a bad place, and was pretty embarrassed by the whole thing. We didn't really talk about it much afterwards. That was over a decade ago, and we're still friends today, and he is settled down and doesn't drink like he used to. My buddy owned a bar. They had a way of dealing with regulars who got out of hand on occasion. They used to say they would 68 people instead of 86. It didn't mean you were banned, it just meant you couldn't come back for a while. Like a suspension for a month or 2 depending on the infraction. Just to let the other people cool down and decide they weren't pissed off at you anymore. Glad your friend is okay. Maybe it was the wake-up call he needed. I was bouncing in a big nightclub in the early 70s. Theirs was a little guy in a suit that had been there since around 5, and it was now 7 or so. He pinched one of the servers on the butt, and she came to me to complain about him. I went over to talk to him, and see if he was getting too hammered. I told him if he did it again I would have to ask him to leave. He is all apologetic. I let him stay, and go back stocking the bar. Not 2 minutes later the server is back again. It is Mr. Happy Hands touching her again. This guy's about 5'7" and 160 pounds tops. Let's just say I'm over twice this guy's size. I told him we can leave with my arm around your shoulder, laughing and having a good time like we're good friends, or I can tippy-toe you out the door with your hands twisted up behind your back, and give you a swift kick in the ass as I shove you out the door. He says, "Friendly walk please, ha ha ha." About 4 years later, I'm a programmer, and get hired at an insurance company. The guy in the office next door comes in and introduces himself, and we're both wondering where we've met. He leaves, then comes back about 10 minutes later and asks me if I was ever a bouncer. It hit me who he was, and we got a good laugh. He thanked me for being easy on him. We ended up best friends for almost 40 years. He finally drank himself to death this summer. I miss you, Steve, you crazy bastard. Haven't been a bouncer in about 15 years, but funny story from when I was a guy I threw out and had to manhandle roughly. He was trying to hit me and other people came back the next day, not to start trouble or get in again but merely to apologize and go. Seeing somebody genuinely sorry was a very rare experience. He said, and I quote, "I know I was a bit of a cunt and needed a slap, I know I'm banned, I was off my nut and just wanted to say sorry and no hard feelings." It stuck with me because he really meant it. It really doesn't go like that most of the time. Edit: I never really saw people from the clubs I worked at in my day-to-day life because the clubs I worked were way far from where I live. On purpose. So few people take responsibility and apologize for their shitty behavior. When it does happen, it's refreshing. This one time I got really drunk while visiting Melbourne and weaved a path of destruction down Chapel Street. Problem is I was staying on Chapel Street. I walked up and down just apologizing to the places I remember going. I walk by a club and the bouncers just start laughing and saying, "You again, mate?" I apologize and say I don't remember what happened. They say it is alright, they just couldn't let me in because I was trashed, and then I took my shirt off like I was gonna fight them, then laughed and said they were right and gave them a hug and put my shirt on and went to the back of the line to try and get in. Did a couple more times like that, then went on my way. They said it was pretty funny and asked me to come in for a drink. They said no one ever come back to apologize. Then one of them glassed me. Man, most of the people who come back sobbing and apologizing, which happens a lot, are doing so because they're asking to be unbanned. I'd happily unban a guy if he didn't even ask to be unbanned, as long as he wasn't banned for something dangerous. I had a pretty dumb phase in my early 20s when I got blackout drunk like 3 days a weekend. I got kicked out of a bar on Friday night, came back Saturday and apologized and stayed there a while with the same friends. Got kicked out a second time. Working concert security and had a similar experience. It was a jam band type show, which is always a pretty chaotic night. Guy was sitting toward the back of the security and vaulted over several rows of seats plus some stuff up against the back row to get out. When I went to tell him that you can't do that fairly historic venue, climbing on stuff like that is a massive no, he was super apologetic and explained that he got claustrophobic and panicked. He also came back at the end of the night to apologize again. Not how it normally goes. Damn drunk stoners. They make for a hell of a night, but they're definitely not the worst crowd. Not a bouncer but a former bartender. I had to call the cops on a couple who had become angry and violent during a Sunday brunch. Both were arrested. The husband threw a glass at me, but the wife started swinging at the cop, so she got the worst of it. Rumor has it the husband was released later that day, but the wife spent a few days in jail. A few weeks later I was in Walmart and spotted the couple. The wife didn't see me, but the husband did. We both walked away in opposite directions without saying a word. But truth be told, I was terrified. During a Sunday brunch. Was definitely not expecting this. Who gets violent at brunch? They must have been monsters. Edit: I get it, mimosas. Sunday brunch. The wife started swinging at the cop, spent a few days in jail. I have a slightly relevant story. My brother went to uni in kind of a rough city. He was at a student bar and watched this guy get bounced. Well, he and the bouncer crossed paths again that night. The guy came back with a chainsaw. Needless to say, he ruined the fun for everyone else and cops were involved. Bouncer was not injured. Edit: Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, for those asking. Did not expect this to blow up like this, but one of the commenters was there. What a twist. He saw, he bouncered. I was fucking there that night. It is not every night that a drunk man shows up with a chainsaw at your local watering hole. I feel like either this is a huge coincidence or your story may have inadvertently intersected with my dad. LOL. Did your brother go to university near Baltimore? My dad was on a jury there for a case where someone was kicked out of a bar and returned with a chainsaw. Ha ha ha, I'm from Hamilton. Gotta say, even by Hamilton standards that's crazy. Especially if it happened at McMaster. I live in a pretty small city in Germany where not much happens. One of the 4 clubs didn't let a guy who wasn't allowed on the property into the club. He started a small fight with the bouncer and tried to get inside to kill the owner. He left, after getting kicked out. 30 minutes later he comes back with an M14, shot the bouncer in the head, tried to get inside but got held up. Police arrives right after. He injured a cop and got shot on the place. Started seeing the job of a bouncer in a different light this day. Hamilton. This doesn't surprise me one bit. LOL. I worked the door at a punk dive bar. Big part of the job is bouncing people who've had too much with the attitude, "It's cool dude, we're all friends, but you've had enough tonight, come back tomorrow." 99% of people that's fine and it works. One dude who had probably smoked some meth that night was fixated on the bartender wearing a Superman shirt and ran home to shave his head and came back challenging him to a fight. I urged him outside to get ready for the fight with a pre-fight smoke. We smoked cigarettes and gently convinced him it was time to go home, which worked until he got halfway down the street and sprinted back and threw himself at the door screaming, "Superman! Superman! You can't hide from Lex Luthor, Superman!" One of the bartenders exited out of the side entrance and started yelling, "Holy shit, all the cops are coming, everybody run," and the dude disappeared. I saw him at the corner bodega the next afternoon and he looked at me and smiled and said I might have been a handful last night, sorry, see you tonight? I grudgingly respect his commitment to the bit. I was a bouncer in a higher-end Toronto club in 2000/2001. People were generally respectful and just out to have a fun night. The only real memorable ejection was from a couple we caught having sex in the ladies' washroom. It was very awkward, we had to ensure that it was consensual, and ask them to stop, and then escort them out. Because the bathroom facilities were limited to 3 or 4 stalls per gendered washroom, there was a long line-up for the ladies' room. The couple then had to do the walk of shame past the long washroom line-up. They were then escorted from the establishment. Good. Women's restrooms already take way too long and have queues that go on forever, loudly crying face. I had to do something similar. A customer came up to me and said people were having sex in girls' bathroom. The bathrooms were mostly unisex except this one big bathroom that had a lock on it. Me and another bouncer go knock on the door and a guy just says hey and walks out of the club straight out. A girl comes to the door and says she is gonna come out in a min. There's a mirror opposite of the door and she didn't know, but we could see her completely naked behind the door. Poor girl was wasted drunk and needed help getting dressed. We walked her outside and tried to get her a ride, but her phone was dead. Eventually a friend of hers came, was looking for her the whole time. She worked at a Kroger's around the corner. I saw her again but she had no idea what I was talking about. I told her to get tested because there were no condom wrappers in there, so she might have gotten something. I was working at a strip club as a rent-a-cop for the parking lot when a bouncer comes out escorting 2 people out. Bouncer chuckles and says to me these 2 aren't allowed back in because they were caught in a stall in the bathroom fucking. I ask what's so funny and he goes I have to go grab her boyfriend in the bar and let him know she been ejected. Not a bouncer but an ex-manager, so still had to throw people out. Had one guy come back sober and apologize for his behavior, and actually thank me for throwing him out. Apparently it was a wake-up call for him, not the first time he'd been an aggressive drunk. I didn't see him again after that, so not sure if he actually changed though. Edit, thanks for the awards folks. Didn't expect this to blow up. I stopped working at that bar a few months after it happened, so even if he did go back, I wouldn't know. Hopefully he did get himself together. Here's to hoping he did. Edit, a lot of drunkards here. LOL. At the minimum, he changed bars. Not a bouncer, but have been kicked out. Was at Marley Bar in Newtown, Sydney with some friends in 2012. I had just bought my first drink of the night and had about 2 sips when a girl in my group who had been drinking all night started dancing near us. Eventually she bumped into me, causing my drink to slosh a bit and spill, nothing too major. The bouncer noticed from all the way across the bar and pointed to me and beckoned me over. When I got over to this massive 6'5", 300 pounds guy, he told me I had to leave because I was too drunk. I tried to explain to him that this was only my first drink and the girl bumped into me and he wasn't having any of it. I refused to leave since I had spent $15 on a drink I had taken 2 sips of, and there was still plenty left. He took my drink and told me to wait there, returning with $15 and told me to get the fuck out of the bar. Reluctantly, but with my $15 back, I decided to leave and not cause trouble. When I got outside I called one of my friends and told him to meet me outside, where I told him what happened and asked him to switch shirts with me. I walked right up to the door and that same bouncer, handed him my ID, and got let in without him even recognizing me. I've never spent any meaningful time inside of a bar before, but I think it is safe to say that bouncer was not very good at his job. Kinda reminds me of the time I got kicked out of a bar for talking to one of the girls I was with. She was very attractive. A bouncer saw me come out of the bathroom and walk up to the group of girls in line for the girls' bathroom and immediately asked them if I was bothering them. Me, being a little very drunk, immediately said, "Oh, am I bothering the girls I came here with? Am I bothering you?" The girls laughed and said no, I was with them, but the bouncer was having none of my shit. He kicked me out with the reasoning that I came out of the bathroom way too hot. To this day I still have no clue how I managed to come out of the bathroom hot. Anyway, on the way out the guy escorting me thanked me for not giving him any shit, different guy than the one mentioned above. I got outside and me and the outside bouncer laughed about how I was the first person bouncer number 2 has ever escorted out. Turns out I also got kicked out at 1:55 am when the bars closed at 2 am. Marley Bar bouncers can somewhat often be absolute cunts, mate. You're not alone with these kinds of stories. So the policy was to never eject women unless absolutely necessary, especially if they are hot. Ex-pub manager here. One evening I had a group of drunken young idiots who started a fight in my pub, which needless to say ended up with them getting kicked out. Fast forward a few weeks and I was having breakfast in a local cafe with one of my bar staff before opening when said group walked in and immediately recognized me, cue the verbal abuse and threatening behavior, so I finished up and left. But it did not end there. My friend had managed to keep most of the in the cafe. He half knew them, but one strolled out straight up to me and dislocated my jaw with a right hook, followed by several kicks to the back as I went down. Needless to say, that day is why I no longer work in the pub trade. Honestly, fuck people. Isn't that illegal? I mean, can you file a case? I used to bounce at a club in Annapolis, if you can call throwing drunk spoiled little rich idiots out of the bar bouncing. 3 guys I had thrown out a few weeks prior saw me in a shopper's grocery store. They started following me, first talking shit and then throwing food at me. I left my cart, walked through the 3 of them and told them to meet me outside. They called the police, and when the police showed up the 3 stooges didn't leave the store until then. The manager lady nicely and happily explained to the police what they had done and they were arrested for throwing store items. Never saw them again. I remember one called himself Big Country, a fat sloppy idiot thrown out of the Navy for being a fucking moron. Thrown out of the Navy for being a fucking moron. Navy vet here. Now that takes some special doing, getting kicked out for being a moron. Anyone named Big Country is always a character, and usually not in a good way. I can't imagine how stupid you'd have to be to get thrown out of the military. Former barman, had to encourage a lad to leave his work Christmas party after his elaborately choreographed karaoke rendition of Like a Virgin with very pointed references to an older lady his boss I suspect did not go down well. Saw him the next morning working the till in the local supermarket. I've never seen someone's face go white red green so rapidly. White red green, at least he stayed with the theme of the season. Guy just instantly decomposed from shame. I've never seen someone's face go white red green so rapidly. How festive. I've been a bouncer for almost 4 years so I have some stories. I work in a small music venue / nightclub and one night we hosted a rave night. Now, most of these guys are late 20s early 30s and it seems like all of them have a lot of money. So obviously we were charging £20 on the door since we could fill the place out even if we were charging people a lot to get in. Now this one guy didn't want to pay that much and decided he would have a go of trying to sneaking in and telling me he already paid, which he obviously didn't as I've been on the door all day and never left that spot. Anyway, he is arguing with me, throwing all his credit and debit cards at me, so I'm annoyed and go to pick them up until he slaps me on the top of the head with one of his cards. Now I pride myself on being calm and rarely ever having to put my hand on someone. But this guy went too far, so I put him in a headlock and drag him out while his friends are laughing at him. Oh, did I mention to get into the out bar you have to go down a flight of stairs? Well, imagine how hard it is to get someone out who doesn't want to leave. Well, I and the other bouncer carried this guy up the stairs and dumped him outside. Anyway, about 2 weeks later and shopping in Morrison's supermarket and he spots me and approached me. He apologized and he wanted to make it up to me, so paid for my meal deal and shook my hand, so I would say that one went pretty well. Shame you didn't keep your cool. Could have just stood there, arms crossed as the card ricochets off your head and said total 007 style, sorry sir, it appears your payment has bounced. This one guy in his 40s I bet came into my bar once and was clearly on a new level of drunk for himself. This was around Christmas time and it is normal to have people who don't normally drink much come in and not be used to drinking. Basically it is a really shitty time to work in a bar. Anyways, he got so wasted we eventually had to take him outside. He was hitting on girls half his age and was just generally obnoxious. Mind you, bar was one where 18-20-year-olds would hang, more a club really, so he was very much out of his element. We had stand there for 3 hours while he was stood there yelling at us and spitting at us until the cops had time to come. Again, Christmas. They came and I walked out to talk to them. Then as I was walking past him he clocked me in the back of the head, in front of 2 cops and 3 bouncers. Suffice to say he was eating pavement faster than I could react to the hit. Couple days later he came back, literal hat in hand, and apologized to no end. Was very clear he was remorseful. Dude had just turned 45 and his wife had left him right before Christmas. He was just in a really bad spot that night and got a bit too much. I get it. I didn't press charges and he bought us bouncers a really nice bottle of cognac each. Now I didn't drink back then, but my stepdad got a really nice gift that year. Never saw the guy since. Poor guy. Thanks for your story. Sounds like a bad situation. I used to work with a guy who was a bouncer where he told me that he used to work at a club where a local gang would hang out. He said that he'd tolerate them as long as they didn't start any trouble until one day one of them showed up with a serrated bread knife and threatened to stab him if he didn't let them through. What the hell kind of gang has a guy dumb enough to try and stab someone with a bread knife? LOL. I once went to a pub and realized I knew the bouncer from elsewhere. She was a nude model at an art class I attended. So by night she works in security and by day she works without insecurity. Striking a pose to checking hose. You saw right through her? I'm not a bouncer, but in my youth I got thrown out of a bar for taking a picture of my wife. We were young then LOL and were out drinking. They let women dance on the bar some nights. My wife starts doing it, so I snap a pic to show her after. Never in my life have I seen so many bouncers jump onto someone. I got kicked out. I was able to come back later, after my wife confirmed it was me, her husband, taking the photo. I worked as a bouncer in college for about 3 years and I'll never forget one night one of the bartenders called me over to check on a young lady who was essentially passed out. She was kind of sitting in a chair and there was a dude next to her trying to talk to her, attempting to scoop her up. I asked what was going on and he said it was his GF and he needed to take her home. I told him I wasn't going to let some random guy put an unconscious girl into his car whether it was his GF or not. I took her over to the door I was posted at. One of the bartenders ended up tracking down a girlfriend she had come with. I told the friend that her boyfriend had tried to take her home when she interrupted me with, "She doesn't have a BF." Fucking creep, I'm sure it happens all the time. Edit, wow, thanks for all the rewards, I never thought this would get this much attention. Edit, bounced for about 2 years not 3. To be fair to the bouncers, it's better to be overprotective than underprotective, especially when in an environment like a bar with plenty of alcohol. You get a lot of predators in these places, many of them with erratic, unpredictable behavior, especially when drunk. One moment they might just be innocently pointing a camera at someone and the next moment they just snap. I knew a stripper at a bar one time and I went to visit her and to see some titties of course, and she came over to my table with a Gatorade, set it on the table and walked off, and the bouncer came over and jerked me up out of the chair and was going to throw me out for having a Gatorade. LOL, she had to run over and squash the beef. I own a small restaurant with a bar and we have to 86 people a few times a year. One of them was a regular who just got a little too racist. We all hated him anyways and were just waiting for him to screw up. He did. We had to drag him out. Total scene. I see him all the time. If he's drunk, he will talk shit to me but I just walk away. He's a sad, drunk old man who's already filled with misery. Punching him in the mouth wouldn't solve anything. Maybe he has never been punched in the mouth, could be the problem. Who just got a little too racist? Sounds like a guy in a bar in my town. He has been thrown out of 2 bars actually, since I have known him, only continues to visit one though. I'm not a bouncer but I went to school with a guy who became one. Unfortunately for me, he thought I had been banned from the bar he worked at in a case of mistaken identity. But because he knew me, he'd always recognize me if I tried to go in and stop me. I ended up having to go in another time and meet the managers so they tell him to stop throwing me out. It wasn't mistaken identity, he just didn't like you face with tears of joy. You boned his girlfriend, didn't you? I bounced for a few years in college. Welcome weekend, the weekend before classes start would get pretty rowdy, and I had to kick a handful of people out. One guy in particular, I had an extended interaction with, where I threatened to choke him unconscious. It was a whole thing. Monday comes, he is the teacher's aide in the last class I have for my major. Syllabus day is bullshit, we just go over what the semester looks like and do some introductions. I was one of the last people to talk to the class, and as I got done, I'm walking back to my chair and the Ta says something like, "Also don't get wild at the bar, he works there and will not be nice if you get him mad," and kinda laughed. The prof then made me come back up, and have the Ta tell his story, then me tell my side. Everyone had a good laugh and the dude ended up being a regular at the bar after that. Been thrown out by bouncers and met them later, they don't care what happens after, that's just their job to do at the time. I used to bartend, and I wouldn't hold any reservations for someone I have kicked out my pub previously. Think it is the same for door staff. Yeah, I've been tossed out before. I was trying to throw confetti streamer things into the crowd. Since I was drunk, I did a bad job at it and the roll of paper hit someone, I guess. I'm not a bouncer, but I've been regular enough as a patron and performer at a particular bar to see people get bounced fairly often. It is the kind of place where most of the patrons are regulars, and a few of them just overindulge sometimes. Most of the time, it is not a problem, they sober up and when they show up the next weekend and everyone's cool. There was one guy though that got a permaban, I'm not even sure what for, but he had been a problem in many ways for a while and he showed up later with a knife. They had to lock the door and call police, who found him pounding on the door while everyone was still inside drinking and dancing. That guy eventually got his shit together, but not until spending a few stints in jail and having a couple of restraining orders against him. Former bouncer here, yes, it has happened, they normally just avoid eye contact. Avoid eye contact, maybe they can't see without their beer glasses. When I was freshly 21 I used to hang out at one of the local bars almost daily. My ex and I were going through a rough breakup and constantly getting coked up and then arguing or getting way too drunk and getting cut off by one of the bartenders. One day he cut me off and I called him a jackass and left no tip, which is extremely uncharacteristic of me. I stopped going to that bar for years because I was ashamed of myself. Several years later and I'm starting a new bartending job and lo and behold, it is the guy I called a jackass who's training me. Since then he has gotten me into another great job and we've actually become quite good friends. Might even start living together. It is a happy ending with a messy beginning. I hope that you eventually bought him a drink to make up for not tipping. OMG, they were roommates. Regular bar hopper here. I got cut off and asked to leave a club a couple times for being too drunk. It was a regular party place for me. Get hired a couple years ago at a serving job and I'm talking to the manager, just having a chat after the job offer. We both realize we know the other, he was the bouncer who asked me to leave. Had a good laugh about it. We had friends in common too. It was a small city, 300,000-ish, a lot of students and the restaurant/club scene wasn't huge. So me working in the industry also meant that the people I partied with were also the bouncers and bartenders that served us. Edited for clarity. Is that supposed to be 30,000 or 300,000?
Like and subscribe for more Reddit content. Watch the next video at the top of your screen.